Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Just got to eating the bride.
Shoot.
No,
Oh, yeah, it's not like that.
we have a large audience, right?
It's on YouTube, though.
Right. So there'll be an asynchronous audience.
Hi, I'm Charli.
Hi,
Nice
Katrina.
to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Is your first Charli?
No, I'm just talking to the...
Oh, I co-founded and run an education program called InspireSTL.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of this one. There's these little pads.
Good job, babe.
Free paper, huh? Free anything. You got a lot of junk there, no? Oh, you don't have junk? Yeah, I got a lot of junk. Say no, huh? You're not having it.
I don't have a lot of...
But it took that long. Right. Right, right. Well, that's totally different in my case. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's bitterness. It's bitterness.
Do you email us those questions?
All right, so good morning, everybody. Good morning. This is day 2. Good morning. This is day 2 of a 3-day panel-based conference hosted by St. Louis University's Office for Diversity and Community Engagement, as well as the Black Student Alliance and African American Studies program. We are honored again for you, those in attendance, just joining us. Welcome. Those who were in attendance yesterday, hello again. I'm going to start like I did yesterday with a brief introduction of our moderator, and then we'll get to our esteemed panelists next. You all are in for a treat today. We have some of my best mentors on the panel today. I'm going to start with the moderator, though. So Brendan Underwood is a graduate of St. Louis University High School. He is an incoming freshman at St. Louis University who has committed his life to social justice. In August 2014, he was deeply shaken by the death of Michael Brown, who died less than 7 minutes away from his 7 minutes away from his home. Brendan made his voice heard at St. Louis U High by establishing and running a social justice group called Student Teacher Association for Racial Study, or STARS. Brendan was so impassioned that he gave a speech about his personal journey for social and political justice at the St. Ignatius Family Teaching for Social Justice in front of 1,700 people. I made a joke yesterday, if he can handle 1,700 people, he can definitely handle the room today. He currently interns for the local Urban League and is working on various projects to serve the city of St. Louis. Everybody, please give a warm welcome to Brendan so he can introduce the panel, please.
Good morning, everybody. Happy to see all your faces today. But the first session we're going to enter today is the education session. And this discussion is going to be hosted by, I'm going to be asking questions to these panelists for the first 40 minutes, and the last 20 minutes is going to be questions by the audience. If you have any questions, please hold them toward the last 20 minutes, and we'll make sure they're answered by the panelists. Before we start the discussion, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves, starting all the way down there and then coming toward me.
Good morning. My name is Charli Cooksey. I'm the co-founder and director of an educational access and leadership development program called InspireSTL. I was born and raised here in St. Louis, North City, and I am thrilled to be here today.
Hi, my name is Dr. Katrina Thompson-Moore. I am professor here at St. Louis University in the Department of History and African American Studies. I am not a local. I am actually originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, but I married a local, so I'm starting to learn all the rules here. And just happy to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Leamon Bazil. I am a native St. Louisan. I am a adjunct professor here. Actually, I'm a postdoc fellow here. On the placard it says adjunct, but I'm a glorified adjunct, put it that way. I've taught in the African American Studies department, and also I teach in the philosophy department. And I'm glad to be here, and hopefully we can have some meaningful and substantive dialogue about education. Right.
Just hours after Mike Brown's death, his mother, Leslie McSpadden, spoke to educational obstacles facing young African American men. This panel will begin with a consideration of the impact of her words and how they call educational institutions into the accountability with black communities. My first question I want to pose to the panel is, do you feel that there is educational inequalities between students of color, particularly black students versus white students? And it's open to the whole panel.
Yes, there is definitely educational inequalities between students of color, which often goes off also with economics, but not necessarily. People always think that students of color that maybe have more economic background, they do have more opportunities, but they're still students of color. So they still have to face racism at their often majority white institutions. So historically, there have always been inequalities. And inequalities, people often think simply not having enough teachers, having enough the proper books. It's more than that. The inequalities come down to what's even being taught. You know, if you're not getting your own history, you know, if you're not actually getting the perspective of Latinos, African Americans, and you're not understanding that you have a place in that history, that affects you mentally simply with the knowledge you're getting. Two, you have inadequate facilities. And these teachers are trying to make it work. Some of them still care, some of them, but like it's hard. And so there's so many levels of educational problems. Simply getting to the school sometimes is hard. And so yes, it's economic, but it's more than that. It's racial, you know, and so all of these problems take place within the classroom, outside the classroom, on the school campus. And so yes, there's a serious problem. And it was interesting, that was one of the first things that she said. Because one of the big things with Michael Brown was that she worked so hard to get him through school. This is something that the whole community has to work so hard to get you through school. That should be basic. And what she means is she had to fight with people who told teachers, she said, your kid isn't smart enough. You have to go to school and fight them. You have to fight with the neighborhood with kids who try to get pulled to gangs, doing drugs. You have to fight with that. Then you have to fight with what's in the actual books when slaves are being called workers. You have to fight with that. Oh my gosh. And that's sometimes just junior high. And so imagine those type of inequalities. So it's educational, it's economic, it's racial, and it's fluid throughout the U.S. system.
I would say absolutely, and piggyback off of what Dr. Thompson said. So the answer to this question about whether I feel educational inequity exists, especially for young people of color, is yes, and that's really what prompted me to start an educational access nonprofit. So I was teaching 6th and 7th grade at one of the public middle schools here in the region, or in the city district. And I had these really transformative experiences with my students. I got a chance to loop with them from 6th grade to 7th grade. And while they grew taller, my voice didn't necessarily get deeper, but they became much more evolved, and I saw how much potential they had. And so I had this unique opportunity to travel with them to 8th grade. So I really took that seriously and started to consider, what would their life be like once they enter high school? And we really embrace this idea of culturally responsive pedagogy. And so we were reading current events articles and learning about statistics that really apply to their reality. And so one day we read an article and crunched the numbers, and out of my 30 students who I taught on average, only about 18 of them were projected to graduate from high school. Only about 5 of them were projected to attend a 4-year college or university, and 3 or less were projected to complete a 4-year college without having to take remedial courses. However, every single student in every class I taught, the ones who had Fs, the ones who were perfectly well behaved, the ones who had who I wouldn't have known their ambitions, every single student that they wanted to attend college, graduate, become doctors, lawyers, teachers, and all of these wonderful things. And a little more context about almost 100% of my students were students of color. And so when you compare those statistics of less than 3 graduating from a 4-year college, but if you cross the Delmar Divide and go to West County, you will see a whole cluster of very affluent, predominantly white high schools, well, pre-K through 12 schools, where high school graduation is not a celebration, but it's like the bare minimum norm, where college acceptance and matriculation, it's just understood. So really, the work that I do daily addresses this question and really challenges the region to think critically about how do we provide educational access for more students of color and for more students who live in poverty.
Good. I think that, of course, there are educational inequities between students of color, particularly black students versus white students. I think that more often than not, white kids are better prepared for at least the collegiate experience than black kids. They have better reading comprehension skills, they have better writing skills, they're better at math and science, and the question is why, right? Why are they better prepared? And the answer, I think, is that the basic structure of our society, I mean, systematically, institutionally, leaves black kids unprepared, right? And this is something that's willful on behalf of some parts of the population, and it's kind of like unwillful maybe in relation to other segments of the population. But I mean, we have a scheme of distribution in this country that leaves black children unprepared. You think about how education in and of itself is funded in America through residential taxation schemes that favor wealthy kids, right? Also, the school to prison pipeline that exists in the inner city, where these kids are just basically funneled into the prison system, and I just can't for the life of me figure out why, because it costs more money to house a prisoner per year than it does to educate a child. And if the child is educated, then they will have less likelihood, right, of needing to engage in the kind of activities that are going to get them incarcerated in the first place. I think that, you know, when we talk about funding, which you mentioned, right, we don't need equal funding for poor kids, right? We need more funding. Because, I mean, it's like we're hemorrhaging. It's like if a patient goes into the ER and he's got a bullet wound, right, and you got some kid that has a broken arm, who are you going to treat first? And how are you going to throw the resources, you know, or distribute those resources? You're going to handle the problem that's most dramatic, that's most pressing first. Our communities are hemorrhaging. We need more resources than these other kids are getting in these inner cities, right? And it's not just resources, though. It is the curriculum also. It's Eurocentric. These kids don't want to participate in that. They don't. It's not relevant to them in their situation. So the educational curriculum has to be more practical, right, and more relevant to these kids' lives. Otherwise, they're gonna, like, what's the point of this, right? So yeah, we got deep-seated inequities.
Where have you, as educators, people concerned about education, felt like you weren't able to help your students of color because of restrictions or resources, or lack of resources? How do you feel the students suffered because of that?
Well, I would say I don't necessarily believe in restrictions when it comes to what's best for our kids. So as a teacher, I never felt as if policies hindered me from really making sure that my kids had access to a culturally responsive pedagogy. I mean, there were times where I got pushback, but every day I was thinking critically around how do I provide my students access to learn more about the Black Panthers, to learn more about what happened to Emmett Till, and to think critically about what that means in present day and how some of those systemic inequities are still pervasive throughout their lives and they may not even realize it. So I think in terms of curriculum, I haven't experienced many barriers because of that deep commitment to our kids and knowing that we have to do whatever it takes, whether it follows the rules or it doesn't follow the rules. In terms of resources, inevitably when you're in an urban school district that's predominantly Black, high poverty, there's a lack of resources. So it requires really this deep commitment to doing whatever it takes. That meant really buying your own paper to print your classroom lesson plans. That meant making sure some students had food to eat. But in terms of structural lack of resources, I would say the biggest thing that is becoming more and more important in my experience is trauma-informed educators. So many of the kids that we work with are incredibly brilliant and they can accomplish anything academically, but it's really hard for us to demand a kid to focus on learning 1 + 1 when they are dealing with incredible trauma, from substance abuse at the home to sexual abuse to brutality in their home and in their schools. When you look at the statistics, there's a book written by a lady named Lisa Delpit, and the data says that black boys feel unsafe in classrooms. So when we think about what happened to Mike Brown and so many other black men and women, that was physical brutality and death, but our kids are experiencing social emotional brutality often every day before they ever even leave the classrooms and walk on the streets. So I think that resource around how do we create a culture of trauma-informed support for our kids is really something we have to answer as a region and as a country, and also thinking critically around how do we not have culturally responsive pedagogy happen in isolation and silos, but how do we create a culture and system around that so kids are getting access to curriculum where they're learning about people who look like them, who have overcome extreme challenges that they're dealing with today, and where that's translating into them graduating from high school and becoming the best versions of themselves.
I've had different experiences since I work here at St. Louis University, so it's slightly different when you're at a private university. A few years back, I was trying to do a program with the local St. Louis public high schools with some community organizations to bring students here for what we call sort of a college 101. Trying to at least, if you just come to a college campus and walk around and realize that you can just come to a college campus and walk around, that's a good experience. And I had that experience in high school, and I knew it would be helpful. And I remember getting pushback from St. Louis public school representatives about one school that's now closed, Beaumont, saying that, oh yeah, we can bring these schools, but we're not Beaumont. And they kind of all looked at each other. And I'm not from St. Louis, so I didn't understand this sort of inside conversation that was taking place. And I said, well, we're not Beaumont. And then I looked up statistics, and I was like, well, Beaumont should be if it's the only school that comes, Beaumont should definitely come. And I remember having so much pushback, and they would not allow those students to come to this campus. They would not provide the buses, and they did not invite them to come. And they came up with so many reasons why Beaumont could not come to the school. Now, from what I understand, Beaumont is now closed. And so I think that was very interesting. That was my first time really dealing with sort of the administration part of the public school system, trying to organize a very simple one-day activity of coming to a college campus, getting food from us, learning about how it is to apply, and realizing that St. Louis University, this predominantly white institution, is accessible to you too. But they just wouldn't bring these students. And I think that what happens is, and that from Beaumont was a majority African-American school, and please correct me in the audience if I'm wrong, because as I said, I'm not from St. Louis, and the majority of people I was talking to in St. Louis public school system were African-American, but they had cast this school and all of these students into a category of they cannot be helped. That's and there was, it wasn't even a conversation for it to take place. It wasn't even something that was negotiable. It was sort of this inside, and I think that is the problem. And I think you mentioned earlier about some students not being prepared. I think the problem is if you walk in the room and they assume you're not prepared. If you have a slight accent, your skin is darker, your hair is kinky, oh my gosh, she could not read as well, or she comprehends it differently than I will comprehend it, so therefore she doesn't know any. I think one of the issues I've seen is that people get put in a box, and these are people of color. And some of us can kind of kick that box open, push ourselves through, but they only let a few of us out. and they weren't letting Beaumont out, and then they shut it down. And so I've noticed that, and I think it's a problem in a majority black city that has this history coming from a majority black city, when you've decided these people cannot be saved or not worth at least sitting at a college campus eating for, like, we were feeding you. We weren't asking for any money from St. Louis Public Schools, just buses. They had the buses. They just wouldn't go there. That's a very interesting part. I mean, it says a lot that they've given up on people, and I wonder how many sort of students are just given up on. Schools, entire school systems that are given up on. And so I've noticed that in St. Louis, and every city has this, we have this in my hometown, there's certain areas that we just give up on. Oh, they're from this area, this street, and you cast them into a particular light. That's a problem. So that's what I've noticed with the educational system and restrictions. The other part is that when you do have some teachers white teachers who are teaching students of color and not knowing how to do that. I've recently started to work with high schools talking about teaching African American, incorporating diversity, Latino, Asian Americans, African Americans in their history classes because they're teaching U.S. history. And one of the questions I get every time is, well, what do we call them? And it took me a while to be like, oh, are you talking about them, me, my people? Like the people who've been here since Jamestown? African Americans, Black Americans, and that's a huge question. Because you're teaching U.S. history to high school and junior high, and you don't have the basic knowledge to know how to call people a particular title. And I said, well, what do you call white Americans? And they said, Americans. And I just sort of looked and I said, wow, okay, this is another conversation. And normally they bring me around in February to do this, and they give me 10 minutes sometimes to talk to a room full of teachers about how to add diversity. And I realized I just added diversity to the room that I walked into because I'm the only person of color. And so it's more than just students, it's all of these various layers. You have these great groups or somewhat controversial groups like Teach for America who sends these teachers in schools. They're not at all culturally competent to deal with the diverse issues that are taking place in those areas, nor are they teaching anything about the people who look like in the room. So it's resources, it's money, it's teaching from junior high, elementary, high school. If a teacher who's been working in St. Louis public school system for 25 years are asking me that question of what to call the people, and first I had to say, Black, that is a problem. That's a very basic problem. And you only really asked me that in February. And so resources, restrictions, there are so many levels, period, that we need to work with on these resources and restrictions. Money, competency, how do you speak to students, prison the pipeline, why is this kindergarten in handcuffs because they got into a school fight? I would stay in handcuffs in kindergarten. Like all of these are problems that we have to look at. So these are restrictions and resources, and this is something locally, nationally that we need to really focus on.
Wow, I don't know how to follow up on that. But yeah, my only teaching experience has been at St. Louis University. And so therefore, I can't say that there are any restrictions at this level. But I am from the same area of the school that you were talking about, right? I live in an area where if I would have not gone to a private school, I would have gone to Beaumont for high school. My mother said, well, this is not the kind of high school I want to send my son to, so she sent me to CBC to go to high school, right? But most of my friends went to Beaumont, right? And before that, they went to Turner Middle or Ashland, right? Schools that are basically swept under the rug. Like the kids from there are not expected to go on and matriculate into colleges and to be productive citizens at all. They're expected to be prisoners at some point. And I think that that's problematic. I have a friend who is a teacher in the public school system. She's an elementary teacher. Just the other day, I was helping her to move some boxes from the basement to the classroom. But when I approached the school at which she teaches, it looked more like a haunted house than an American school. I saw liquor bottles in front of the school. The school is supposed to open in 2 weeks. right? You got liquor bottles outside of the school, and you have trash all over the front grounds of the school. You have ironwork that is rusting and it's dangerous at this school. I went into the classroom and I saw damage on the ceiling, paint peeling all over the place. How can a kid learn in an environment like that? I mean, what you see, like, there's beauty, there's aesthetic value on this campus, right? And you're comfortable because of the way things look, right? But what happens to a kid's mind when they see ugliness, when they go where they're supposed to gain beautiful knowledge about a whole host of subjects? What happens to that kid's mind? They know something is not right here, something's amiss, something's not being given to us, attention is not being paid to us, right? And I think it's a damn shame, right? So we need to get on the ball, we need to do better by these poor folks, right?
All three of you spoke on the condition of the education. I think that's very important. And do you think that this poor education that you're seeing in the communities correlates to poverty and crime? If yes, how? And how do you think the local governments how do you think local governments can better fund and reform this and make it a better priority?
Well, I would say it really starts with us empowering young people to really own their power, to own the power of their voice and what they can do with it. So it really starts back in the classroom. How do we make sure that they're receiving access to the right education and pedagogy that really challenges themselves to see themselves as leaders, so that they are seeing the urgency around registering to vote. They are seeing the urgency around becoming those people in positions of power. So as we think about it, like even on a high school level, there are ways that we can change policies and fundings within schools themselves. So something that we do at Inspire, we're always providing our scholars training on how to run for elected office, how to lead movements within their high schools, and we're seeing change. So exciting for this scholar to lead this initiative, but sad that it's just now happening. We had a scholar at DeSmet where we supported him with running for elected office, and he was, I believe, the first black student to get elected at his school as class president. And once he stepped into that leadership role, he was really committed to diversifying the power structure there. So after he stepped in, he also helped hire the first teacher of color / diversity director, and they are launching initiatives to help strengthen that culture of inclusion. So I think it's really giving them the experiences as soon as possible where they get to practice their leadership, where they really get to exercise their voice, and then really outside of the school helping them learn how to build power within the community so that they can see that what they do matters and that they can really influence the power structure and diversify it.
One thing that you talked about was sort of aesthetically how schools look, and I really never thought that hard about it until you said it, because there is a really big difference. And one of the ways with very specific, how schools are funded, this charter system that we have. I know New Orleans, after the storm in my hometown, charter schools sort of took over, and the charter system. And what ends up taking place is those students who are left in the public schools, that school is getting less money because there's less population, and those students are often just sort of neglected because they're the students who couldn't get out of that school to get into a charter school. And it's very similar to sort of the Beaumont situation. Those students are cast to, you're not going to really make it, let's sort of invest to the ones that can. And I'm also thinking of property taxes and how they're funding schools and how that's distributed. And there's a sort of there's a huge difference, and I think we need to sort of reconsider how schools are funded and the money distributed. It's been, because essentially rich neighborhoods, people who own homes, have nicer schools. It's a very basic system. How can we distribute this money in a more evenly way where these students, even if it's an equal system, just to be really honest with you, because let's be honest, those schools who have more money, that are getting money from the federal government because of property taxes in their neighborhood, that are from richer areas, they're going to already have donors. Those neighborhood parents are not going to let their school goes down if the federal government gives less money. And I'm thinking of, what is that? There's a school in Central West End. not U City. It's sort of this. It's just beautiful school. It's hidden. It's in the deep city. I jog past it, and I know because they called security because I was jogging in Central City, and it was one of those residential streets, and they started following me. And so that's a whole nother topic. But the school is gorgeous. And so what I'm thinking of, if you redistribute, and this is very specific, property tax money for public schools. Because my attitude is, it's not because you want one school to go down, is that you're all trying to bring schools up to at least try to have some type of equity in the educational system. I think that actually is a very specific way. And also re-examine this charter system. It doesn't work for us in New Orleans. I don't know how it's working throughout the U.S., but I think we do need to look at the charter system, and these are very specific things, because I do think that I don't think there'll ever be an equal system in the United States throughout, period. However, we can make it more fair. And the way we look at property taxes and the way we look at schools and say, these parents have money, all it is just a cycle. And so therefore, you have a school that you get a better education. You get into the better college. You have a job waiting for you when you come out. You have to really struggle for something to get out of these other schools that have less money because a lot of people in the area are renting. And so to me, you have to look at how the money is being distributed. I would love to see just a breakdown of how much money each of these schools are getting. And also, it's problematic with attendance and how attendance is accepted, because that's also determined how they're getting money. You can't bring up a school by saying, hey, you're not up, so we're giving you less money. How does that work? It's just not logical. And so we need to change the way we're thinking about school, period. And I think just the fundamental way we pay for public school system needs to change. You know, the fact that your mother could send you to a private school, that's not an option for a lot of people. My mother did the same thing. She was like, okay, half the students from that 11th grade class at your local public school can't read very well. I'm going to send you to this private school. I'm going to struggle as a single parent and do that. My mother was blessed to be able to do it. That's not easy. And so that shouldn't be the only way you get a good education, because your parent can send you to a private school. Our public school system needs to change.
I concur with that. I don't know. I think the question initially, though, was what's the correlation between poor education and crime, right?
Yes, sir.
Like, like people who are not educated, they go on to a life of crime.
Poor education in the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood.
Yes.
Right. I just think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You don't want criminals in the long run. Well, you educate people and you develop their capacities. You help them to self-develop and to self-perfect. That's what you do. And you prepare them, I think, as, I forget your name again? Charli. As Charli mentioned, I mean, you want to prepare children to become competent citizens. That's the goal. That's the aim. It seems like what we want from the educational system is to create obedient kids who are going to have jobs, right? So all they're doing is just learning a certain set of skills or a specific set of skills so that they can go into the job market or go into the marketplace and then be productive and efficient there. But that's just one aspect of what it takes to be a virtuous human being and a competent political citizen, right? You have to have more than just a certain set of information in your head that you can use to work for your employer. That doesn't make you a competent citizen at all. So I just think, like the very way that we view education has to change. Right. So.
But not only that, treating children like criminals.
Yeah.
They treat, I teach African American history, and I often teach the story of Emmett Till, and we're all familiar with the story of Emmett Till. And one of the stories is that they're so threatened by black men, they have to go to a boy and lynch him. This idea, and so you have these police officers who are aggressively treating kindergartners, and they're on college campuses, and they're walking away with in handcuffs. They're preparing them to go to jail, because you have these police officers that I don't know if they're having special training to work at these schools, some type of sensitivity that these are children, but they're rough handling children early because they see them as a threat. Teachers see them as a threat, and they're calling the police. That's a problem. That's a problem when you have these police officers with these guns at elementary putting kids in handcuffs. That's just starting it off. my brother attended a HBCU. I'm not going to name the HBCU. And I remember they put a police station on campus because it's a state-funded school. And they put one right on the campus. It was right there. And so more students on that campus started to get arrested. And actually get arrested. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when college kids get in trouble on their campus, campus police sort of take care of it. And it's not as, we kind of, if it's not a huge crime. But now that they have this police station at this HBCU campus, they're actually going to jail for stuff that normal college kids for doing very stupid things would just sort of get like, hey, you're on probation or something. And so African Americans, Latinos are being treated differently from kindergarten. I'm sorry, I think sometimes kids get into fights and they should be put in corners and they should be punished, but I don't think they should be handcuffed and walked out of school. Period. And so you're telling them this is where you're going to end up. You're going to jail. This is what's going to happen to you. We're just letting you know now in kindergarten, first grade, that you're going to jail. And why? Because you're black, and this is the pipe we've decided. You can't just be a bad kid who gets himself together in junior high, you're a straight A student. We don't allow that because you already have a record. And so I think that crime this isn't something that's always been around. I don't consider myself old. I don't remember police officers just being on campus handcuffing kids. But I do remember kids getting in trouble. The fact that that is so different is a problem. Police dogs on campus searching through lockers, that says something right there. So that's related to the crime part, is that now you're a criminal in kindergarten. And you got arrested at your school. And that's how teachers view you. That pipeline starts very early. That's a problem. And these police officers on these campuses, I have a problem with that. Because they are throwing these kids down on the ground. And I have to show it's similar to this idea that you have so much threatened by a black man that you have to lynch this 14-year-old boy in Money, Mississippi named Emmett Till, and now you have to handcuff this kindergarten in St. Louis, Missouri. There's something wrong with that. There's a parallel there.
I would like to add on a little more. So one piece of context is that St. Louis has one of the highest populations of private schools. So when you think about an urban school district, those who, there's so many people within this region who have the capacity to send their kids elsewhere. So I think it's going to be really hard for us to think about how do we push legislation and funding models and policies and shift those to be more equitable when those who have the resources to shift policies are not, they have no investment or reason to be committed to what's happening in the city. So I think that's one thing to think about. And then additionally with that, that's not an excuse to not shift the funding model, but it also challenges us to be more creative and be more committed to grassroots efforts. So there is power in community organizing. So we need to think critically around how do we empower our parents and our everyday residents to learn how to organize and build power in the number of people, so that power in the number of people can shift to power in the number of dollars that are going into the classrooms of our black and brown kids.
I think that's right.
We have about 5 more minutes left until the open Q&A, but I want to pose this question because I think all you guys touched on a little bit, but there's a lot of disparities with people of color in high school, in school, in education in general, on every level. But you guys spoke on this in regards with suspension, especially in suspensions and disciplinary actions. How do you think these disparities should be addressed in these different levels of education?
Well, I think everybody's talked about it to some degree or another, but I do think that you need to have protestation against these kind of practices where we're just basically handcuffing kids, right? I don't see any good coming from that, right? That's a punitive model that's leading to destruction, right? And then you're teaching them how to submit to unjust authority. But to what end? I mean, I know I got in trouble in school all the time. I got in trouble after I got out of school, right? I mean, but the problem is the way that the black bodies are policed in America, right? I mean, 9 times out of 10, black people aren't doing very much more than any other group of people are doing in the United States. I mean, like, say, for example, the reason that there's a big bump up in incarceration of black bodies is because of the drug war. We all know this. I mean, the whole point is that, but black people don't use drugs any more than white folks do. But we get arrested for it, get incarcerated for it, and our lives are damaged because of it, more so than any other group of people, right? And also, we have to think about dealing drugs and the reasons why kids do such things in these inner city neighborhoods. I mean, if there was more opportunity there, then you wouldn't see these kids doing the kind of things that they're doing. If I knew that I had a big, fat, juicy job that's going to pay me, you know, a living wage, and then from there on, you know, I could have a family and have a picket fence, the house, the 2 dogs, the 2 kids, right? Why would I go into a life of crime if I know I can just move right into a job and work that job and live a decent life? You wouldn't see these kids going out here risking, and they know that they're taking risks, right? Risking their lives out here on the streets. But again, when it comes to the schools, these kids, they're just kids. They're going to make mistakes. People learn from mistakes. That's how you learn, from making mistakes and correcting the mistakes. But it seems like what we want to do is institute this retributive justice model, right, that doesn't do them any good. So let's incapacitate and punish. Well, what's up with rehabilitation? You know, what's up with making a person understand, okay, we've done something wrong. Let's acknowledge that we've done something wrong and move on and do something positive afterwards. That's what we should be teaching our kids, especially our kids. If we can't let kids make mistakes, then for crying out loud, then what's the point of being a kid in parenting and educating? All right, so protestation, local control over the school system, that's how you begin to approach the problems, I think.
There's a really good example of some legislation being passed in Illinois. There were a group of teenagers who actually led an initiative for there to be a shift and transformation in what disciplinary processes looked like in the whole state. So we can really learn from that. I can't remember the name of the group or the legislation that was passed, but it just happened recently. But I think there's really 3 things that need to happen. We need to reevaluate what are our hiring practices for our teachers. Are we critically assessing the right things? Are we measuring their commitment to self-identity? Are we measuring their commitment to how they are aware of others and their differences? Are we measuring a potential teacher's competency around creating a classroom of inclusion? So I think that's one of the first steps. And then also that is training. So how are we creating that environment where there's ongoing training for our teachers to know how to interact with our kids in a way that's supportive instead of seeing the kids as criminals? And there's a lot of great ways to think about that, but it really starts with understanding how the teachers identify and how they see their students. And I think the third piece is the policy piece. So this change can happen on a district level, on a city level, and on a state level, but it can also happen on a classroom level. So thinking critically around what are my multi-step disciplinary processes, and maybe not even calling them disciplinary processes. What are my multi-step support processes so that everything that we do in this classroom is empowering kids to become the best version of themselves versus penalizing them for being a kid. And I think there are, I know you made some comments about Teach for America. I think that there's lots of room for improvement of TFA on the local and national level, but what's happening here in St. Louis is a great blueprint. Brittany Packnett and her team have really instituted a policy and procedure where the people they hire, the teachers they train are all held against a rubric that it's focused on racial equity and identity. And so training that they get, I think every month, and training that they're used to be evaluated on is deeply rooted in equity, race, and identity. So I think we can really learn from that and figure out how to scale it so that all teachers are being held accountable for that.
It has been proven that students of color are suspended at a higher numbers, period, for the same infractions that white students are doing in their schools. And that is a problem. And I think that understanding that racism, period, plays a part of this. You know, it does. It's not necessarily something that people are intentionally saying, you're black, I'm going to make sure that you're suspended faster. It's something that just seems to happen, and it could happen from white administrators or black administrators. So I think that overall, this has been proven, and the higher number that you're suspended, the more likely you are to go to jail. I mean, all of these sort of statistics are out there. We need to change how public schools are looking at disciplinary actions, period. And also, these schools need to publicize how their students are being suspended each year, so we can know, wait a minute, why is this one school suspending this many African-American students per year? Like, why? This is pretty high. Someone needs to be looking at those numbers, and those records need to be kept. And the people who are making these decisions need to know these records are kept. And be a little bit more conscious of the fact that, hey, someone is watching over, that you can't just arbitrarily suspend these kids out of the school system. Also, something they do here at SLU when you have disciplinary action, I think it works, is that you have a student on the board who helps to make these decisions. That students actually are very interesting when you ask them to grade other students. They actually, they're often a little bit nicer, but they then try to reflect on themselves. They looked at it, and students are actually very smart. And they have ideas of how the world should look. So if you have students involved with determining outcomes of disciplinary actions, that actually can help. If you have a group of people who determine before a student gets suspended, and the race of that student is not, or maybe even not their name, is put on a file and is just determined. If you have certain infractions that are determined, if this student does this, this is automatically what happens. And also, the idea of sending a kid home to often a very violent situation for a few days out of school as punishment has, even as a kid, shocked me. Wait, you're going to send me home to watch TV for 3 days? Because there has to be other and new ways to talk about disciplinary action. But I think having students more involved helps. Students are really great with that. They really are. And having accountability. St. Louis American every year can publish, this is how many suspensions at this school. You're going to see certain schools with very high numbers of African American suspensions, period. That number is going to go down once we all know how many students are being suspended. When people are aware that you're watching them do their job, they change. They do. So just more accountability, more student involvement, and just some basic, you do this, this is what happens. Instead of somebody who's seen you too many times get in trouble, tired of you, decided they don't want to help you no more, and they want you out. We need better systems. And honestly, we really need to realize there's some people in the school system that we have to talk to. They don't like kids. Some people in the school system don't like children. They have this bitterness and hatred towards people around them. And there's some people who are excited and they want to do more. We have to have these conversations. We have to re-energize the ones that are tired. We have to sometimes shift those people who don't like kids to something else. And those people with these great ideas, someone needs to listen to them. And we need parents who don't just say, oh, okay, my kid's suspended. Come on, little bad kid, come home. No. We need to have a talk. This is automatic teacher. This is a conversation. And so we just need to be more involved as a city overall. I would look every year if St. Louis American published how many suspensions, how many disciplinary actions due to race and color. I'm telling you, that will change the school system because they're being watched. And so I think that makes a big difference. Other than just these standardized tests, how many are passing? Okay, that's a whole nother topic. How many times are you kicking these same students out and you're giving up on them? Let us know about that in the city, because you know what? Those students are going to affect us too. Because these students, they stay here. These students are going to affect us too. So we are investing in every single student in St. Louis.
I'd like to add one more piece of context. So,
can you make it real quick?
Yeah. I would, as we think about holding the school districts accountable, oppressors seem to know how to navigate certain advancements and manipulate the system. So one thing that is a growing trend is in-school suspension called ISS. So we have to really figure out ways where we can understand what's happening within the schools, because you'll see a lot of schools where there is a huge decline in suspensions, the traditional suspensions, but there's a whole classroom or 2 full classrooms of black kids sitting in there doing absolutely nothing because they don't want it documented that they were suspended from school.
I'd like, before we move into Q&A, I want to introduce our fourth panelist, Dr. Warmack. And just like, can you give a brief introduction of yourself? And I will pose a question to you after you give a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure, I'll make this very brief. I apologize. I thought I had control over my calendar, but we had a crisis come up and, I had to handle that. So once again, my name is Dr. Dhawan Warmack. I serve as the president of Harris-Stowe State University, directly across the street. I am from Detroit, Michigan, an urban core, and I was excited to be a part of this panel. And I'll just touch this briefly. I was over here about a year ago. I moved to St. Louis July 14th of 2014. My introduction to the state of Missouri was 3 weeks later, August 9th, the Mike Brown tragedy. And so I was able to see it from an outsider looking in, the social constructs, our ideology around race relations in this community, and what we did well and things we needed to improve on. So I'm excited to be here. I have some context I can share on that. Growing up in Detroit, in the projects of Detroit, to a single mom. Mom had a GED. Father served a 23-year sentence in the penitentiary. One little brother serving 42 years who was shot in the back by the police. Other little brother who's serving 9 years. So my ideology and perspective is a lot different. So I don't look like your stereotypical academician nor president, nor will I will be. Right, and so I'm clear about who I am and whose I am. So, and I'm passionate about the urban core. So, that's me.
And thank you for being here. I'd like to pose the first question we asked all the panelists before you arrived. The question was, do you feel that there are educational inequalities between students of color, particularly black students versus white students, especially since you're coming from HBCU? I'd like to hear your opinion on that question.
Is that a trick question? I mean, it's clear. I think it's, and I would just say it's more socioeconomic based, so when you think about funding sources to different districts, I'll start K through 12, so if I'm under-resourced, there's a higher probability I can't hire quality faculty. If I can't hire quality faculty, I won't have quality instruction. So there's a direct correlation between quality faculty and lack of quality instruction. So that's one thing. I think from a higher education perspective, I think it correlates the same way. I think, but I would say historically, for historically black colleges, it's clear the #1 producer of African Americans with PhDs, and it's only 105 HBCUs out of 3,500 institutions across the country, but still produce the #1 producer of African Americans, PhDs, and MDs. So I think it's, regardless to whatever the resource allocation is, I think it's the passion and commitment that comes at our HBCUs about, they're clear about their mission, who they're serving, and why they want to serve. So.
Thank you. Now the floor is open to Q&A. To anybody who has a question to any of these panelists. And they can ask questions about HBCUs or predominantly white institutions as well. Either question will be welcomed by the panel.
Good morning. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we had the adage of it takes a village to raise children and to be successful. So I've heard a lot about the schools, I've heard a lot about the children. What about the parents in this and the neighbors? I know the neighborhoods, some neighborhoods are great, some neighborhoods are not so great, but still there are some good people in all of those neighborhoods. So what do you think about the parents and the adults in those neighborhoods? How do they help in the educational system?
So I think you mentioned a very interesting time, the 60s. When we think about so some would argue, as a sociologist, one would argue the positive and the negative impact of integration, right? So when you think about the 60s, it was a village, and you knew if you got out of hand, Miss Jody right down the street was going to tear your tail up, right? Now that whole mindset has changed. So I would argue the 80s, that transformation really began to change with the crack epidemic that hit our community, right? And so the high influx of drugs that were placed in our community that destroyed the community in a major way. And so now you really, there's no community. Then you had the black flight, right? So I'm just thinking about the urban core of Detroit. So when you think about the community and the critical mass of individuals that left the city to go across 8 Mile, right? Because they thought they were getting something better. So the community is no longer a community. And so we can't expect the community to be that village, and there's not a community there. And so I think what we had in the 60s was a unified community that believed in accountability and responsibility, that it was okay to hold your child accountable. But now, you know, there's babies raising babies, right? And so in understanding what does that look like in our community. So there's a lot of constructs that are there that we have to deal with and be willing to face those as well in our community to have those conversations.
And I'd also say when we think about poverty in the urban core, it's so often, it's very rare for a family living in poverty to have consistent home location. To speak to Dr. Warmack's point, what is community when your community and its residents are constantly shifting from month to month? And that also impacts school too. So how do you build a community within the neighborhood, and also how do you build a community within the school when kids are so transient?
I think that, you know, the question is on point because we live in neighborhoods now. We don't live in communities. People don't know the next door neighbors. I mean, they don't know, and they don't even have any interest to know because all they're interested in doing is going to work and coming home and going inside the house and watching television. There are no rituals, no practices, no institutions. I mean, they exist, but we're not tapping into them, right, in order to be autonomous and to be competent citizens. The way that you develop virtue is through institutions and your involvement with the institutions. It just so happens that this is a neoliberal society and everybody is achieving their own ends and aims and employing what we call in philosophy instrumental rationality to achieve those ends. So there's no common or collective good being sought after. It's all what's good for me. You got to get yours. I got to get mine, right? And that kind of thinking, which is endemic, you know, to a neoliberalism, is what's plaguing our communities. And we bought into them, you know, this neoliberal idea wholeheartedly. And until we change that and begin to pursue collective goals, well, you're going to have the same kind of problem. We're going to keep bumping into the same, you know, impasse over and over and over again.
And I think, you know, when I moved I moved to the Normandy area recently, and when I moved into the area, I went to knock on my neighbors' doors to say hello. And it was a very interesting experience because first they thought I was selling something, or they, you know, you look out the window, you don't open the door, and you kind of look again. And so it was a very odd experience. I finally got, you know, I was able to talk to really one person who happened to be the mayor, because St. Louis has so many mayors and municipalities. And she talked to me for some time, but I really couldn't talk to my neighbors. It was growing up in a neighborhood, in a community where, like, if I rode my bike too far, my mother knew before I got home. And then going, when I get my first house and going door to door and people don't answer, or they kind of look, even though when I drive past, everyone waves. It's a very odd experience. So I think that it's just not the same. You know, I agree with you with integration does change this. There was a book by Eugene Robinson called Disintegration, which talks about the black community no longer is a community. Socioeconomic, there's different points of view, there's different political means, and it's because they're not forced to live in a residentially same area. And so you don't have these different classes in the same area, and the reason they're in the same area is because they're black. That no longer exists. And I think also specifically for St. Louis, because I'm thinking about my mother-in-law lives on St. Louis Avenue in North City, and she's very big into her community and trying to at least keep up the areas that she can, but you drive and every other house is condemned. And I think, well, is this city just going to let these beautiful old houses stay like that? It's very hard for a community to rise up when you are trying to take care of your house, but the house next door is condemned. And that's a very common thing in St. Louis. And it's not common in all urban areas, but you do see this in some areas. But St. Louis has a serious problem because you have North City, every other house is condemned. There's a block that's condemned, and then you see this beautiful house, and people and you could tell they're trying to have this integrity into their house. If we as a city helped build up the area, the community will come out because they want to have more pride in it. And I know my mother-in-law and some of her friends are trying, but they're older, you know? And so we need to sort of work together trying to sort of build this up. But I do feel like the neighborhood and the community that we used to have where you borrow eggs from next door, I don't think that is, it's not here, and I don't see it coming back, just to be really honest. But I do think that we could at least have, if you start to have pride in your house, in your neighborhood, then you start to have pride in your school. You know, like those type of things come up. It's very hard when every other house is condemned.
I will say I did think of one blueprint. It started off in Harlem, the Harlem Children's Zone, and Alderman Antonio French is modeling after it in the 21st Ward. So the North Campus has done an exceptional job at engaging the residents from youth to seniors, and they have after-school programming daily. They have ways to engage the family. They have busing that goes around from block to block in the community to pick up the kids and be involved in programming. So I think that is something we can look at being scaled. And also I think we have the right to hold our churches more accountable. In my neighborhood in North City and lots of neighborhoods, on every block or every corner there's either a church or a liquor store. So why not hold those churches? I think we think about, I don't know how we can hold the liquor stores accountable. How can we hold those churches accountable to shift those buildings to being after-school facilities for kids to come to and get help with their homework or just talk about life?
We have about 5 more minutes. You both have a question, right? Okay, can you guys both ask it right one after another so we can have the panelists answer them?
My question is that I, in addition to being a writer for the university, I also am a graduate student and a doctoral student in the School of Education. And one of the concerns I have is that there's a consistent trend of knocking social studies off of the curriculum in a lot of schools. They lump it with humanities or they don't address it at all because it's not on the test. And I have a real issue with the idea that you're not teaching students, a whole population of students who need to be able to vote and be productive citizens. You're destining them to not being able to do that and to not make connections between what happened at Pruitt-Igoe that's very local, to not see that families were broken up, that fathers were not allowed in the building. I mean, these all, it's a step away from slavery. Why wouldn't that be taught?
Hey, y'all. So my question is that I had the pleasure of working for the Normandy School District to represent them through their media company. And one of the things that I noticed working with them is that I'd never seen so much pro-black community in an area ever. And I went to the Ferguson Florissant School District. There's pictures of slaves on slave boats in their school district building. Like, I saw parents in that building every day. Alum come back and greet the students on the first day of school. I'd never seen anything like that before. So I don't even know if there is, do you believe that there is a such thing as a correlation between strong community and statistical academic success? Because I've never seen community like that. I've never seen community support, and I've also never seen students who felt so secure in that support, if that makes sense, coming from a related district. So that's my question.
Can the panelists quickly answer those two questions?
I'll just say this. Right now, our culture is moving away from emphasizing the importance of the humanities, right, and just in general. And I think that's a mistake because, I mean, you can have technology, right, and you can have theoretical knowledge, but if you don't have any practical wisdom and any contextual understanding, right, and any competency as a citizen because you know history, right, and the role history has played into how we got to where we are now, then you're lost. You know, you don't have any practical knowledge, right? And I think that's just a big, big, fat mistake. And to your point, if you have pride, right, community pride, then you're going to have better schools and you're going to have children who feel comfortable, right, and those children are going to flourish and thrive. And that's the kind of environment you want kids to be in, one in which they feel comfortable, and they know that people care about their development. And I think that those are some important things to think about.
I'm a historian, and of course history being, and the humanities being taken out of schools, it hurts, and you can see the fact when they come to my classroom. I have a problem overall with the standardized test, teaching to take a test. My mother's a teacher in New Orleans, and she teaches for them to pass tests. That's it. And so overall, the No Child Left Behind syndrome, the standardized test, that's problematic, just to put in a minimum sense, and that's a whole nother panel or conference on just how the standardized testing that's affected the educational system. But also, and that's sort of to answer both questions about this community pride, and you mentioned sort of slaves and pictures on these walls, that when you know your history, you have pride in yourself and what you can do and where you can go. And that's that's all connected. That you can't, the reason they have that up there and not simply just George Washington and Thomas Jefferson is because if you see people like you who have accomplished these great things, it puts pride in yourself. These things go together. And I've heard of other schools that you have teachers and administrators who are greeting them outside, making them feel safe. That affects you not only educationally, mentally, physically, spiritually. It makes you it just changes your world. And that is for any person of any age. If someone's there supporting you, greeting, I would love someone to wake up and greet me every time I came to work. You know, think about it. I mean, like, hey, that would, you'll be on time. But that would make all of the difference in your life. But that's a part of you having pride in your own culture and you being taught your culture through history and the humanities and creative thinking and just sort of thinking out of the box. And then you being welcomed as you belong here and we want you to succeed. Those two things all go together. And you can't, it's you know, and I'm in the Normandy School District, which is great because we've been having a lot of problems for a while. It's great to hear, but it's just sort of, you have to, all those things go together. And that's something that we need to work on. But that's so, I mean, there's a lot to be done.
It's now 11, so if the other two panelists have something quick to say, can you guys get it done quickly?
Well, I would like to sort of speak to your point. I have seen a growing shift in the decrease of social studies classes and also science classes, which is ultimately detrimental to our kids. But I also think we can challenge ourselves as educators across all subjects to see ourselves as historians, and we can really infuse history into any classroom. I mean, when we're looking at math curriculum, we can challenge our students to measure the radius of Pruitt-Igoe and how tall was the building and what was the impact when it imploded or when it was eradicated. And we can also infuse that same piece of history into our English class. How do we have our kids read about these historical events and movements and apply that to learning main idea, to learning theme, and to figuring out how do I use math, science, social studies to become a leader. So there are ways, I believe, to address that in the meantime until we can make sure that it's once again a priority as its own class.
Dr. Warmack, would you like to address one of those questions real quick?
I think I want to go back to that Normandy piece. I think it's you create this sense of community, you create this sense of pride, but with limited resources, you still can't be successful, right? You know, I think it's, and so I would really challenge to look at the resource allocation compared to another district, right? So I can have as much pride, much passion, much family commitment, but if I don't have the resources to hire the best teachers, if I don't have the resources to hire, have the proper busing to happen for our students, all of those things are systemic, you know, and so, and those students still have to go back home to the poverty that's there as well. So, yeah.
And that ends our educational panel. But please give the panelists a round of applause, please. Our next discussion starts at 11:15, and it's the student leader discussion. We have a 15-minute break.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
May I have your attention for just a moment, please? If you're sitting in a chair that has a dot on the back, would you please let me know? There is a chair with a green dot on the back. Okay, if you want to.
Thank you very much for coming.
And I understand. It's very
Yes, yes.
If someone was sitting next to it,
Here's how you, the non.
okay, Laverne, you won this Fitbit. Thank you.
Right.
Even, and I wrote this for, well, actually posted in public, but I wrote it. They do affirmative action in college. My opinion is affirmative action, there's as much need for majorities to have it and have the experience of being with those people who've experienced it. Because if they don't get that experience now, they're going to carry into the next generation the lack of that experience. We're going to perpetuate where we are today.
Cambridge University High School.
I mean, it's so awful to me. And the comment, I don't know if you made the comment about the churches, but the churches aren't your churches. They're all of our churches. The white churches have to be more involved in partnering those things. And I've been trying to, we're going to have, apparently going to have speakers today, but
right.
I've been teaching African studies since 1984.
Right.
I know all the relevant materials. And I know perfectly well that what we are doing.
Okay, well, again, you're welcome to either of those two things.
Right. Right.
But it does. But see, it doesn't. And let me just show you one thing.
And I wouldn't mind getting around back up here at some point. Hello. Which is why I gave you my card, don't you know?
I'm giving
Yes, sir.
Mine.
That's right.
Thank you very much for coming out.
But no. I want to have
Okay.
But this is.
I mean, and I'm not
such sense.
It's my
Such sense. And I don't I want to talk to them.
Right.
I gave them a summary of all the things that I thought needed before the Ferguson told me. Now they came out with a lot of things that we were there. But he called me summary of all the things that I think, people I wrote, I should have done. I mean, please. Because now it's time to watch the brilliance of the three of you all. I said, he had to let us know he teaches philosophy. I said to myself, ain't he something else? I tell you. But it's all right. I ain't going to hold it against you.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't do it.
No, I ain't going to hold it against you.
Yeah.
But it's just much. Like, when we can take the room, we can say, I appreciate the question. And then, what's his name? Our first lady, first president, and a couple of first ladies. Do it. Make it happen. An old man is asking you.
I hear you, brother. I hear you. I hear you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes. Really? I went to Xavier Prep. My husband went to Xavier.
What did you do to Xavier? All of that before her age.
Yes, I graduated in '97.
Well, that's when I started at SLU.
Oh, okay.
But I taught at Xavier
Okay.
Yeah, my nephew graduated.
Did you know Sister Gilda?
Thank you. It can't work. I mean, I would like to.
Really?
And she and Manuel Williams, she's working with Gilda.
Okay.
Manuel Williams passed her. The system's amplified when you're trying to tell her she don't have a location for this life yet. That she needs to leave it.
No. Sister, oh my God, she taught me religion. She taught me.
Excuse me.
I
I've known Gilda since before you were born.
Wait, she's been here for a long. So when she
I've been in there 42 years.
But she'll rock the boat. Will she rock the boat? Is Sister Roland still? You know Sister Roland? Yeah.
Yeah, ain't nothing you can say about, you better say something. Yeah.
Oh, I love Sister Roland.
All right, thank you. Somebody else is right. And she don't want nobody. Check with her.
And Sister Gilda will check.
And all of us know this other woman's background, and they stopped her from teaching at Xavier Prep. And Gilda said it to me. She said, well, you know, Jane Nesbitt.
Oh, God. So what does that mean?
Well, then they're going to find a way to leave. They're reporting to you.
They just, like, don't you have to, like...
Well, she told me this. And I said, have you told anybody, like the two bishops, that love you to death? And she said, no. I said, well, what? I'm just presided at this funeral. Come here. Bishop's died. Let me tell you what just happened. He went, oh, God, no. And I said, two of y'all talk.
Yeah.
And then I went back up to Carbondale and called Bishop Fernand Cherie, who's now the Bishop of New Orleans. And I said, Bird, he said, well, never mind what he said. It wasn't like a bishop, but it was my friend.
Yeah.
I said, y'all need to do something. He said, well, they can't do that. No, she just needs to get a canon lawyer.
Yeah.
Can you?
He knows my old teacher.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I probably know your old teacher.
Well, see, I went to Xavier University.
I went to prep, so yeah. There's a lot more done.
Yeah, well, I probably know somebody who taught you that, don't I?
Maybe. I would assume so. What did you graduate? I graduated in
I was there.
Really?
I was running the Black Catholic Studies at Xavier and starting the Black Studies program there.
My husband started in 94.
91 was when we had the special program. Only
Whatever you want to do, that's fine.
So you probably,
well, I took philosophy classes. I knew Beaver, Barber.
yeah.
I mean, those are the people
I'm glad. It is. I told you.
I got to talk about. I got to use. We have.
Yeah, you see, and all his friends. See, I went to Carmel here. They all went to Xavier.
Well, the man who was here for Better Family Life yesterday, because Mayor Henderson, the president,
Okay.
who just died
Yes, I
a few months ago too. He was my assistant. Oh, when I was studying here at St. University in the 60s, where it was and I was walking up there, decided to put some more. I seen this morning, Martin Bush, Paul Reiner said, you gotta cut those niggas down because I don't want anybody destroying my university. And they still got his name on the building.
See, I didn't know that.
Well, other names are slave owners.
Right,
you know,
right.
the slave owners who own the
You don't have to do that. I mean, when that thing came out, my classmate in philosophy studies here, Matt historian, when I was 66, Ken Pipe, his master's thesis on the Jesuits in Slavery at St. University. It's in the library.
Okay, you know what? They asked me to do research about that.
Did you know Jeff Dorr?
Yes, I know Jeff.
Well, he's been down to my house to study with me.
Okay.
He's one of my favorite young people.
And so, what year did you come out?
Probably 67.
And what's the name of the student?
Ken Fight. He's been dead now.
Okay.
But don't ask me what the exact name was.
No, I can find it.
Library in the history in about 1967. Barnaby, what's his name? Robert Barnaby. But I can't remember. I'm going to see the DVD sometime of when the black doctor was talking to somebody talking about that black education. And somebody in the audience said, well, what would it take to get you to come up here? I said, about $275,000. Because I said, you're going to have to pay me full endowed chair and give me the rights to hire 2 more people. Because I ain't come up there by myself. So in 1996, when I was at the fight table in 94, Francis. And judges have this affirmative action program that if you are qualified and they have an opening, you get first time.
Yes.
Now I have 6 college degrees.
I'm Lachelle. Nice to meet you. Hey.